The alpha's sneer smelled like sour ale and old contempt. It was a scent she knew well, the scent of judgment. He leaned over the sticky, worn bar, his bulk crowding her space, and his eyes, they deliberately dropped to the bare, unmarked skin of her neck. A public shaming, quiet and brutal. "Just a drink, outcast," he grunted, his voice a low rumble meant for her alone. Ariel's fingers tightened on the wet rag in her hand. Her knuckles went white. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. Never let them see you break. That was rule number 1 in this forgotten corner of the world, this dumping ground for wolves with no place left to go. She was trained to be a Luna, after all. Poise was etched into her bones, even if her title had been ripped away. She was trained to rule, trained to lead, trained to be his perfect mate. Before Silas had looked at her and seen nothing but a stepping stone he no longer needed. She met the alpha's gaze, her own eyes chips of ice. "We serve drinks here, not opinions." His lip curled, revealing yellowed canines. "A mouth on you. I remember your pack, Mooncrest. Heard they got rid of their trash." Her breath caught. The word, trash, was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. But then, a crash from the corner of the tavern saved her. 2 mangy rogues, fueled by cheap whiskey and desperation, were at each other's throats. Chairs scraped. A table overturned with a splintering crack. Her body moved on instinct. Before the bartender, a hulking, slow-witted male named Gus could even heave himself to his feet. Ariel was moving. She didn't shout. She didn't posture. Instead, she grabbed a half-empty bottle of amber liquor from the shelf. With a single, fluid motion, she slammed it down on the bar. Crack! The sound was sharp, final. It cut through the growls and curses like a whip. Silence fell. The 2 fighting wolves froze, their eyes wide and suddenly sober. Ariel held their gaze, her expression a mask of pure, cold authority. She didn't have rank here. She didn't have a pack. But deep down, she knew the truth. She still had power. She just wasn't allowed to use it. "Get out," she said, her voice quiet, yet it carried across the entire room. "Or the next bottle I break will be against your thick skulls." The rogues scrambled away like chastised pups, melting into the night. Gus grunted in appreciation. The sneering alpha just stared, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. More importantly, Ariel felt a familiar, sickening ache. That small display of command was a ghost of the life she'd lost, a painful reminder of everything that had been stolen. She hated it. She hated feeling it. And that's when she saw him. He was sitting in the darkest corner of the room, a place she hadn't even bothered to look before. A stranger. He hadn't flinched during the fight. He hadn't even seemed to notice. His focus was entirely, unnervingly, on her. His stare was different from the alpha's. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't pity. It was something else entirely. Something ancient and possessive, like a predator that had just spotted its prey after a long, patient hunt. The air thickened, and her wolf, dormant for so long, stirred beneath her skin. Who was he? Before she could move, the tavern doors burst open again. This time, it wasn't drunken rogues. It was 3 hard-faced males, their clothes too clean for this place, their eyes scanning the room with lethal intent. They moved with the chilling efficiency of hunters. And their eyes, they all landed on the stranger in the corner. Without warning, they moved to attack. Ariel didn't know what scared her more. The assassins who had just entered her bar, or the way the stranger met their advance not with fear but with a slow, deadly smile.
The place stank of misery. Damon sat in the shadows, letting the grime and despair of the tavern wash over him. It was a perfect cloak. No one would ever look for the Alpha King of the Northern Realm in a place like this, because a place like this was for the broken, the forgotten, the discarded, and for her. He watched Ariel. He'd known her name, known her story, long before he'd set foot in this hellhole. He'd heard the whispers carried on the winter winds, of a Luna of impeccable breeding, rejected by a fool of an alpha for a politically advantageous but weaker mate. A treasure cast aside. His rivals on the council, Lord Valerius chief among them, saw her as a symbol of shame. Damon saw potential, an opportunity, a weapon waiting to be claimed. Truth be told, he also felt an undeniable pull, a magnetic force he hadn't felt in a century of lonely rule. Maybe it was fate. He watched her handle the sneering alpha. The control in her voice, the steel in her spine, it was all there, buried but not broken. He saw her de-escalate the brawl with a single sharp sound, a display of authority so innate she probably didn't even realize its power. At that moment, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about possession. Mine. The word echoed in the silence of his mind, a primal growl from the beast that slumbered within him. His wolf recognized hers, even through the scent blockers he wore, even through the years of grief that clung to her like a second skin. So, he waited. His goal was twofold: draw out the assassins Valerius had undoubtedly sent after him, and see the she-wolf for himself. He needed to know if the stories were true, because his plan depended on her strength. He had a kingdom to hold, a council of vipers to tame, and a legacy to secure. What he didn't have was a queen. "You're a long way from home, traveler," a voice beside him murmured. It was one of the assassins, trying to act casual. Damon didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Ariel. "Am I?" "Orders from Lord Valerius," the second one said, appearing on his other side. "He wants you to disappear. Permanently." Damon finally turned his head, a slow, deliberate movement. He gave them a smile that held no warmth, only the promise of violence. "Valerius is a dog who barks from behind a fence. You must be the puppies he sends to do his dirty work. Tell me, does he feed you well?" The first assassin lunged. The fight was brutal and fast. He was the Alpha King, and these were mere thugs, but they were desperate. A knife flashed. He sidestepped, his arm snapping out, and a bone broke with a wet crunch. He slammed the second man into a table, the wood groaning and cracking under the force. But the third was clever. He came at Damon from behind, just as Damon was dispatching the first. And then he heard it. Crack. A bottle shattering on the bar. For a split second, the third assassin was distracted, his head jerking toward the sound. It was the only opening Damon needed. In the span of a breath, he spun, grabbing the man's head and smashing it into the wall. The assassin slumped to the floor, unconscious. The battle was over. The room was deathly quiet. Damon stood over the bodies, his chest heaving slightly. He was wounded, a shallow cut on his arm, but alive. And it was all because of her. She had saved him. Whether she knew it or not, she had intervened. As the silence stretched, he slowly turned, his gaze finding hers across the room. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. She was terrified, but she was also magnificent. He knew in that moment that his plan had just changed. It was no longer about using her. Now it was about claiming her, which meant her quiet life of hiding was officially over. Without another word, he started walking toward her. With every step he took, he saw the defiance in her eyes warring with her fear. Good. He wanted that fire. He would need it.
Time stood still. The room was a wreck of broken furniture and unconscious bodies, yet the only thing Ariel could see was the stranger walking towards her. Each step he took was deliberate, powerful, echoing the frantic beat of her own heart. The air crackled, thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the violence that had just occurred. Her instincts surged, screaming at her to run, to hide, to disappear back into the anonymity she had fought so hard to build. But she couldn't move. As if pulled by a string, she was rooted to the spot, trapped by the intensity of his golden eyes. He stopped just on the other side of the bar, close enough for her to smell him. Beneath the scent blockers, she caught a faint trace of something wild and elemental, the scent of pine after a storm, of cold mountain air, of undeniable power. It was the scent of a true alpha, stronger than any she had ever encountered, stronger than Silas. The thought sent a jolt of pure panic through her. "You have a name?" he asked. His voice was a low, rough baritone, a sound that vibrated straight through her bones. Her throat was dry. "Why?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Because I'm going to be saying it a lot." Arrogant, infuriating. Her fear quickly curdled into anger. "I don't think so. I don't know who you are, but this is a neutral tavern. Your fight is over. Now leave." She put all the ice she could muster into her voice, the same tone she'd used on the rogues. It didn't work. Not on him. He simply watched her, his gaze so penetrating, it felt like he could see every scar on her soul, every crack in the walls she had built around her heart. "My fight is just beginning," he said softly, "and you're now part of it." "No, I'm not," she snapped, taking a step back. "I didn't do anything." "You did," he corrected her, leaning forward slightly, his presence overwhelming. "You created a diversion, you saved my life. Those men worked for a powerful enemy, and now that enemy knows you helped me. You are a loose end, a target." Her blood ran cold. He was right. In that one stupid, instinctual moment, she had painted a target on her own back. To make things worse, she realized the sneering alpha from before was watching them, his eyes narrowed with greedy interest. He smelled a story. He smelled weakness. By morning, everyone in the neutral territories would know she had gotten involved with a marked man. Her invisibility was gone. Her thoughts spun. "That's not my problem." "It is now," he said, his voice dropping, leaving no room for argument. "You have two choices. You can stay here and wait for my enemies to come back to finish the job, and they will. Or, you can come with me." Her world tilted. "Come with you? I don't even know you." "You know I'm the one who's still standing," he countered. "You know I'm stronger than them. And deep down, your wolf knows something else, doesn't she?" He held her gaze, and in that moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. "She knows I can protect you." Her chest ached. He was offering her a cage, gilded with the promise of safety. It was the same promise Silas had made her once, a promise that had ended with her heart being torn out. No, never again. She would rather die on her own terms than live on an alpha's leash. "I don't need your protection," she whispered, her voice trembling with a fury she could barely contain. Before the words fully left her lips, he reached across the bar, his hand moving with lightning speed. He didn't grab her arm. He didn't touch her. Instead, his fingers brushed against the unmarked skin of her neck, right over the spot where a mate's mark should have been. Fire bloomed beneath her skin. A phantom tingle, an echo of a bond that had never formed, as if the forest watched, as if fate itself whispered on the wind. Her soul answered his touch with a shiver she couldn't suppress. His eyes darkened with a possessive heat that stole her breath. "I think you do." In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. His touch was a brand, a spark on her skin that lit a firestorm in her blood. She jerked back as if burned, her hand flying to her neck, but the phantom heat lingered. Her wolf, a creature she had starved and silenced for years, paced restlessly within her, its head raised for the first time since her rejection. It recognized him. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. "Don't touch me." The words ripped from her throat, raw and ragged. His hand dropped, but his golden eyes held her fast, a cage of pure, unyielding will. "I wasn't asking for permission," he said, his voice a low growl that vibrated in the air between them. "I was telling you what comes next." Her mind raced, scrambling for a way out. This couldn't be happening. She had built a life here in the dirt and shadows, a miserable life, yes, but it was hers. She had earned her solitude with pain and pride. "You can't just take me. There are rules even in the neutral territories." "Are there?" he countered, a humorless smirk playing on his lips. Rules are for those who can't protect themselves. You can't. I can. It's the simplest law there is, the only one that has ever truly mattered. He said it so calmly, with such absolute certainty, because he knew it was the truth. He had all the power, and she had none. Before she could form another protest, another desperate denial, the tavern door creaked open. 2 new figures stepped inside. They were nothing like the assassins. They moved with the quiet confidence of wolves who knew their place at the top of the food chain. Their gazes swept the room, dismissed the unconscious bodies with a flicker of disdain, and then settled on the man before her. They bowed their heads in a gesture of profound respect. One of them, a male with a jagged scar across his eye, spoke. "Alpha, it is done. The perimeter is secure." Alpha. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Of course he was an alpha. But he was something more. The way they deferred to him, the sheer power that rolled off him in waves. It was suffocating. Her escape routes vanished one by one. The front door was blocked. The back exit was a fantasy. He had her. He had planned this. As if the world narrowed to this single, terrible moment, she realized her fight in the bar wasn't a chance encounter. It was an audition. And she had apparently passed. To make things worse, he looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You fought for a stranger," he said, his voice softer now. "Imagine how you'll fight when it's your own life on the line." He turned to the scarred guard. "Kyle, take care of our mess and prepare her for transport. We ride for Frosthold at dawn." Frosthold. The name was a legend, a myth, the frozen fortress of the north, ruled by a reclusive and brutal king. A king no one had seen in years. Her breath caught. The space between them burned with her unspoken horror. She wasn't just being taken by an alpha. She was being taken by him, the Alpha King. And she had just saved his life.
Damon watched the storm of emotions play across Ariel's face. Fear, fury, and finally, dawning horror. It was a symphony of defiance he found himself wanting to conduct. He saw the moment she connected the name Frosthold to the legends, to him, and her beautiful, proud features went pale as bone. Good. She needed to understand the stakes. He left her with his guards, trusting their professionalism, and stepped into the tavern's back room, a cramped, filthy office that smelled of stale ale and desperation. Moments later, Kale followed him in, his scarred face a mask of disapproval. "My king," Kale began, his voice a low, respectful rumble, but Damon could hear the butt hanging in the air. "This is unwise." Damon turned from the grimy window, raising an eyebrow. Kale was his beta, his oldest friend, the only wolf alive who could speak to him with such bluntness. They had fought back-to-back in the succession wars that had won him his throne, and Kyle's loyalty was forged in blood and fire. "Unwise?" Damon repeated, his voice deceptively mild. "I've eliminated 3 of Valerius's assassins, confirmed my suspicions, and found a new asset. I would call that a productive evening." "An asset?" Kale's jaw tightened. "She is a rejected wolf, Damon, unmarked. Her very presence at your side will be seen as a provocation by the council. Lord Valerius will use her against you. He will call her a whore, a traitor, a blight on the purity of your line. He will say you are weak." "Let him," Damon said, his voice dropping to a dangerous cold. "Valerius and his traditionalist cronies think strength is found in bloodlines and ancient dusty laws. They are fools. Strength is found in power, Kale, and that she-wolf out there. She has a fire in her I have not seen in 100 years. That is a power I can use." He couldn't tell Kale the whole truth. Not yet. He couldn't speak of the mate bond, of the way the world seemed to tilt on its axis when he looked at her. That was a vulnerability he couldn't afford to show, even to his oldest friend. So he had to frame it in the language of strategy, because that was a language everyone in his world understood. Kale sighed, running a hand over his tired face. And what is the strategy here? To parade her before the court. They will tear her apart, and you along with her. The strategy, Damon said, turning back to the window, watching as Ariel was gently but firmly escorted towards the door, is to give them a new target. Let them focus on the scandal of the rejected wolf. Let them whisper and plot and scheme against her. And while they are distracted by the pawn, the king will dismantle their entire game. She's not a pawn, Damon, Cale said quietly. Damon's wolf stirred, a low growl rising in his chest at the implication. He knew she wasn't, but he had to pretend she was, because it was the only way to keep both of them alive. The truth of the matter was, her rejection was a political gift. She came with no alliances, no family demanding a bride price. She was a blank slate he could claim without consequence, and that made her the perfect, unexpected weapon against his enemies. She is what I say she is, Damon stated, his voice absolute. And I say she is under my protection. That makes her more powerful than any member of your precious council. See to it that she is treated with respect, Kyle. She is to be given a horse, not dragged like a prisoner. And if she resists, Damon's lips curved into a slow, predatory smile. Then you will remind her that I am a very patient king. But I am not a kind one.
The escape was an act of pure, desperate instinct. They had been riding for 2 days, climbing steadily into the jagged, snow-dusted mountains that guarded the northern realm. The air grew thin and cold, biting at her exposed skin. Ariel had been quiet, compliant. She had eaten what she was given, ridden where she was told, and spoken only when spoken to. She played the part of the broken, defeated captive perfectly, because she knew they were watching her, especially him. Damon rode at the head of their small party, a dark, imposing figure on a massive black warhorse. He rarely looked back, but she felt his eyes on her constantly, a weight on her skin, a presence in the back of her mind. She learned his men, their rhythms, their moments of distraction. Kyle, the scarred beta, was always alert, but the other 2 guards, they grew complacent. Her chance came on the afternoon of the second day. They were navigating a narrow, treacherous path cut into the side of a mountain. A waterfall crashed down into a misty gorge far below, its roar a constant, deafening thunder. It was the perfect cover. As they rounded a sharp bend, a pack of mountain goats scattered across the path ahead, causing a momentary disruption. In the span of a breath, Ariel acted. She kicked her horse's flanks hard, veering sharply off the path and into the dense, snow-laden forest. Branches whipped at her face, stinging her cheeks. The ground was uneven, treacherous with hidden roots and slick patches of ice. But she didn't care. All that mattered was the wild, exhilarating taste of freedom. She could hear the surprised shouts of the guards behind her, but their sounds were quickly swallowed by the roar of the waterfall and the thundering of her own heart. For a glorious minute, she thought she had made it. Hope, a feeling so foreign it was almost painful, bloomed in her chest. And then he was there. He appeared through the trees like a phantom, a blur of black motion. His warhorse moved with an impossible, supernatural silence, its hooves barely making a sound on the frozen ground. Before she could even react, he was alongside her. He didn't shout. He didn't reach for her. He simply reached out and grabbed her horse's reins, bringing it to a sudden, jarring halt. Her momentum threw her forward, and she nearly tumbled from the saddle. She was left breathless, her escape over before it had truly begun. The silence of the forest pressed in around them, broken only by their ragged breaths and the distant roar of the falls. She looked at him, her chest heaving, defiance still blazing in her eyes. She expected anger, a lecture, a threat. Instead, all she saw in his golden eyes was a profound, chilling disappointment. "Was that worth it?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost conversational. But beneath the calm, a dangerous current swirled. Was a few moments of foolish hope worth the risk of breaking your neck in that ravine? She clenched her jaw, refusing to answer, refusing to give him the satisfaction. He sighed, a sound of pure weariness. He dismounted in one fluid motion and walked to her side, looking up at her. "I am not your enemy, Ariel." "You took me from my home," she shot back, her voice venomous. "I took you from a hovel where you were dying a slow death," he corrected her calmly. "And I did it to save your life. Whether you believe that or not is up to you, but I will not let you throw that life away." With that, he took her reins and began to lead her horse back towards the path, as if she were a misbehaving child. The humiliation was a physical thing, hot and sharp in her throat. Her grand escape had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, dismissive capture. As her wolf stirred with a low whine of submission, she knew her goal had to change. She couldn't beat him with force. She would have to use her mind. She would have to find another way. As they emerged from the trees, the path ahead opened up, and there, in the distance, she saw it for the first time. Frosthold. It was a nightmare carved from black stone and enchanted ice, a collection of sharp, glittering spires that clawed at the gray sky. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and it looked more like a tomb than a home. It was her new cage, and its gates were wide open, waiting to swallow her whole. Frosthold wasn't a castle. It was a wound in the sky, carved from obsidian and sorrow. The gates groaned open, a sound like a dying beast, and swallowed them whole. Inside, the cold was different. It wasn't the clean, natural chill of the mountains. It was a deep, ancient cold that seeped through her furs and into her bones, a cold that felt like it had never known the warmth of a sun. The main hall was a cavern of impossible scale. Polished black floors reflected the light from enchanted ice crystals, creating a dizzying, distorted world at her feet. Tapestries depicting brutal, victorious battles hung from the walls, their threads shimmering with a magic that made the scenes of death and glory feel terrifyingly alive. She was a ghost in this palace of ice. Without a word, she was led away from Damon and handed over to two maids with faces of stone. They took her to a suite of rooms so opulent it made her sick. A fire blazed in a massive hearth, yet its heat couldn't touch the chill in the air. They stripped her of her worn, travel-stained clothes, the last remnants of her life at the brink, and bathed her in scented water. They dressed her in a gown of deep sapphire silk that felt like a whisper against her skin. It was a costume, a beautiful, suffocating lie. Deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't a rescue. It was a transfer of ownership. She had simply been moved from one cage to a much larger, more beautiful one. That night, she was escorted to the great dining hall. The moment she entered, a hush fell over the gathered court. 100 pairs of eyes turned to her, sharp and hungry. They were wolves, all of them, dressed in silks and jewels, their predatory nature barely concealed beneath a veneer of civility. She saw the whispers behind elegantly raised hands, the sneers disguised as polite smiles. They were judging her, dissecting her, and finding her wanting. She held her head high, her back straight, channeling every last ounce of her Luna training. Never let them see you break. She walked to the high table where Damon sat, enthroned like a dark god, and took the seat he indicated beside him. The silence that followed was a physical weight, pressing down on her. She focused on her breathing. In. Out. She was not the rejected outcast from the brink. Here in this hall she was a mystery, and a mystery was a kind of power. But then, a woman seated a few places down the table spoke, her voice high and sharp, cutting through the silence. "Your Majesty," she said, her eyes fixed on Ariel, "you are too gracious. It is not every day we welcome strays into the hallowed halls of Frosthold." The insult, veiled and vicious, landed perfectly. The word stray was a dagger, meant to remind everyone of her unmarked packless status. The court held its breath, waiting for the explosion, waiting for the king to defend his new pet, or for the pet to cower. Ariel did neither.
Damon watched Ariel walk the length of the hall, and the beast in his chest purred with a deep, possessive satisfaction. The court saw a stray. He saw a queen who had forgotten how to wear her crown. The sapphire gown clung to her, a sliver of night sky against her pale skin. Her defiance was a tangible thing, a shield of invisible energy that kept the prying eyes of his courtiers at bay. She was magnificent. He had orchestrated this entire scene with meticulous care. Her grand entrance, the seat of honor beside him, it was all a calculated declaration. A warning. She is mine. Touch her at your peril. Despite that, he knew someone would be foolish enough to test the boundaries. He saw Lady Isolde tense, her lips thinning into a venomous line. She was Lord Valerius's cousin, a spiteful she-wolf whose ambition far outstripped her intelligence. She saw Ariel, not just as an insult to tradition, but as an obstacle to her own family's ascent. Damon could have silenced her with a single glance, but he held back. This was Ariel's first test. He needed to see the fire he had glimpsed in that backwater tavern. He needed to know it wasn't a fluke. Isolde's voice, sharp as broken glass, cut through the room. We don't often welcome strays. The silence that followed was electric. Cale, standing guard behind Damon's throne, shifted his weight, his hand moving instinctively towards the hilt of his sword. Damon gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. Wait. He watched Ariel. She didn't flinch. She didn't look to him for help. For a long moment, she simply picked up her wine goblet, her movements unhurried and graceful. She took a small, deliberate sip. Then she set the goblet down with a soft click and turned her cool gaze upon Lady Isolde. You are mistaken, my lady, Ariel said, her voice calm and clear, carrying effortlessly across the silent hall. A stray is a creature who has lost its master. She let the words hang in the air for a heartbeat before her lips curved into a small, lethal smile. I, on the other hand, have never been mastered. Checkmate. A collective, sharp intake of breath swept the room. The retort was perfect, a masterclass in political maneuvering. She hadn't been rude, she hadn't broken protocol, but she had taken Isolde's insult and turned it back on her, subtly branding Isolde and her entire faction as mere followers, as dogs waiting for a master's command. Lady Isolde's face flushed a blotchy, furious red. She was silenced, utterly humiliated. A slow, dangerous pride swelled in Damon's chest. His instincts had been right. She was more than a weapon. She was a partner. She was his. Later that night, he found her on a deserted balcony overlooking a courtyard of pristine, untouched snow. The cold air swirled around her, but she seemed oblivious to it. She stood staring out at the frozen landscape, a solitary, defiant figure. That was quite a performance, he said, his voice quiet as he came to stand beside her. She didn't look at him. Her gaze remained fixed on the darkness. Did you enjoy the show? She asked, her voice laced with ice. Was I entertaining enough for you and your pack of jackals? The accusation in her tone was unmistakable. She knew he had tested her. I knew you were strong, he said, ignoring her question. I just didn't realize your claws were quite so sharp. I learned to sharpen them on the bones of alphas who thought they could break me, she retorted, finally turning to face him. Her eyes flashed in the pale moonlight. You are no different. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking, crackling with a sudden, undeniable energy. Oh, but I am, he murmured, his voice dropping. I have no intention of breaking you, Ariel. I intend to see you crowned. And to prove it, he decided in that moment, to make it official.
His words were a lie, a beautiful, poisonous lie, crowned. He spoke the word as if it were a gift, but she knew it was just the final lock on her cage. Before she could spit a response back at him, he took her arm, his grip firm, but not bruising. The court is gathering, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It is time. Time for what? She asked, her heart beginning to pound a heavy, frantic rhythm against her ribs. Time to end the speculation, he answered, leading her from the balcony and back into the stifling warmth of the castle. He led her not to the dining hall, but to the throne room. It was even more intimidating than the Great Hall. A vast, cold chamber dominated by a throne carved from the heart of a glacier, pulsating with a faint blue light. The entire court was assembled, their faces a sea of grim, expectant masks. The tension in the room was so thick she could taste it, like ozone before a lightning strike. Damon led her to the base of the dais and stood beside her, his presence a wall of heat and power at her back. He surveyed his court, his golden eyes sweeping over them with an air of absolute command. "For 2 days you have whispered in the shadows," he began, his voice ringing with authority. "You have questioned the presence of my guest. You have speculated on her origins, on her purpose here in Frosthold." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Let me put an end to your whispers now." He turned his head slightly, his gaze finding hers. For a split second, she saw something in his eyes beyond the cold calculation of a king, something raw and possessive, something that spoke of a deeper, more frightening truth. "Ariel of Mooncrest is not merely a guest," he declared, his voice booming through the silent hall. "She is here under my personal protection. She is here. As my intended." Intended? The word was a physical blow. A collective gasp rippled through the court. It was a public claim, a declaration. He had just bound her to him in front of the entire northern realm. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. This was so much worse than she could have ever imagined. But then, a figure stepped forward from the crowd. He was an older wolf, tall and lean, with silver threaded through his dark hair and eyes as sharp and cold as chips of flint. He wore his age and his rank like a mantle of unquestionable authority. "Your Majesty," the wolf said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that dripped with condescension. "The law is the law. It has governed us for 1,000 years. It is the foundation of our society." He gestured towards Ariel without looking at her, as if she were a piece of evidence. "The law is clear. An alpha king cannot bind himself to one who is unmarked. It is an affront, a stain upon the throne." Damon's jaw tightened. "Lord Valerius, I did not ask for your opinion on the law. It is not an opinion. It is a fact," Valerius countered smoothly, his gaze finally flicking to Ariel, dismissive and cruel. "She is rejected, tainted. To elevate her is to invite chaos. The council will never stand for it." The threat was clear. It wasn't just a challenge. It was a declaration of war. Valerius was not just speaking for himself. He was speaking for the Council of Alphas, the governing body of their entire world. Damon stepped forward, shielding Ariel slightly with his body. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Then the council and I are at odds," Damon said, his voice a low, deadly rumble, "because she is not leaving my side." He turned to Ariel then, his eyes burning with a fierce light. "Now," he murmured, his voice for her alone, a stark contrast to his public roar. "Now, do you see why you need me?" She saw, but it didn't feel like protection. It felt like she was the first pawn to be sacrificed in a game she had no hope of winning. The days that followed were a blur of gilded cages and watchful eyes. Ariel felt like a porcelain doll on a shelf, beautiful to look at, breakable, and completely powerless. The court treated her with a cloying, false sweetness that was sharper than any knife. Every smile was a threat. Every compliment was a warning. She ate, she slept, she walked the frozen gardens of Frosthold, and all the while, she felt the walls closing in. The tension in the castle was a living thing, a predator stalking the halls, and she was the bait. She knew Lord Valerius wouldn't let the king's declaration stand. She just didn't expect his response to be so swift, or so personal. It happened in the library. It was her one sanctuary, a place of quiet and shadows, filled with the comforting scent of old paper and leather. She was reaching for a book on a high shelf, her fingers brushing against a worn spine, when she heard it, a faint creak from the shadows behind a towering bookcase. Her body moved on instinct. She dropped, rolling sideways just as a figure lunged from the darkness, a silver dagger flashing in the low light. The blade hissed through the air where her throat had been a second before. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She scrambled backward, her silk gown tangling around her legs. The assassin was on her in a heartbeat, his face a grim mask of determination, his eyes cold and empty. He raised the dagger for a second strike. Before she could even scream, a blur of black fury exploded into the room. It was Damon. He moved faster than anything she had ever seen, a predator unleashed. There was no sound, just a terrifying efficiency of motion. He caught the assassin's wrist, and the crack of bone echoed in the silent library. The dagger clattered to the floor. Without another word, Damon lifted the would-be killer off his feet and slammed him into the stone wall. The man crumpled, unconscious. Silence roared in the aftermath. Ariel was on the floor, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Her whole body trembled. She had been seconds from death. In the span of a breath, Damon was kneeling in front of her. His hands hovered over her, not quite touching, his golden eyes blazing with a rage so profound it seemed to burn the very air. "Are you hurt?" he growled, his voice a raw, guttural sound that was more beast than man. She shook her head, unable to speak. His eyes scanned her, frantic and searching, and then they stopped. On her arm, a thin red line of blood was welling up where the assassin's blade had grazed her. It was nothing, a scratch. But the look on Damon's face, it was as if she'd been mortally wounded. With a tenderness that seemed impossible for a man so powerful, he reached out and gently tore a strip of silk from the hem of his own tunic. His fingers brushed against her skin as he carefully, methodically, wrapped the wound. His touch wasn't just gentle. It was reverent. The calloused tips of his fingers sent a jolt of shocking, unwanted heat straight through her. Her breath caught. The space between them burned. He finished tying the makeshift bandage, and his hand lingered on her arm. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. The rage was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Something that looked like regret and a deep, aching need. The air thickened. He leaned in closer, his gaze dropping to her lips. Her pulse raced, her thoughts spun. No, don't. But her body wouldn't listen. As if the world narrowed to this single moment, she found herself leaning in, too. He was going to kiss her, and she let it happen. She wanted it to happen. But then, he stopped. A heartbeat from her lips, he froze. A shadow of conflict crossed his face, and he pulled back, the spell broken. He stood up, turning away from her, the king's mask slamming back into place. "You are not safe here," he said, his voice cold and distant once more. "Not even in my own library. You will not leave your chambers without Kale from now on." He strode out of the room without another glance, leaving her alone on the floor, trembling not from fear, but from the ghost of a kiss that had never happened. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't decide which was worse, the assassin's blade or the terrifying, treacherous hope that had just bloomed in her chest. That night, sleep was a battlefield she couldn't win. Her thoughts kept replaying the scene in the library, the flash of silver, the terrifying rage in Damon's eyes, and the impossible tenderness of his touch. He had confused her, shaken the foundations of her hatred for him. Maybe he wasn't just a monster. Maybe he did care. It was a dangerous thought, a sliver of light in her dark world, and she found herself clinging to it. Restless and needing answers, she slipped out of her chambers. She knew it was a risk, but she had to understand. She had to know why. Why go to such lengths for a rejected wolf he had practically kidnapped? She moved silently through the sleeping castle, a ghost in the moonlight. She found him not in his chambers, but in his private solar, the door slightly ajar. The low, angry murmur of voices drifted out. It was Damon and his beta, Kale. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart pounding, and listened. It's too great a risk. Cale's voice was strained, urgent. The council is calling for an emergency session. They will use this assassination attempt as proof that her presence brings chaos. They will demand her removal, Damon. They can demand whatever they like. Damon's voice was a low, cold rumble. She stays. Why? Cale's frustration boiled over. Why are you staking your entire reign on her? There are a dozen highborn she-wolves who would strengthen your claim, bring you powerful alliances. Why choose the one wolf in the world guaranteed to start a civil war? There was a long pause. Ariel held her breath, her ear pressed so close to the door she could feel the vibrations of their voices. This was it. The answer. And then, Damon spoke. His voice was different now. It was stripped of all emotion, a voice of pure, cold pragmatism, the voice of a king making a calculated move on a chessboard. Because she is perfect, Damon said. The words were a bucket of ice water in her face. Don't you see it, Cale? He continued, his tone clinical. Her rejection was a political gift. The Mooncrest pack is weakened and she came with no alliances, no family demanding a bride price. She was a blank slate I could claim without consequence. I knew who she was before I ever set foot in that bar. She was an opportunity, nothing more. The world tilted. Her blood ran cold. The air left her lungs in a silent, agonizing rush. He knew. He had hunted her. Her pain, her shame, her entire broken life. It wasn't a tragedy he was trying to fix. It was a resource he was exploiting. The tenderness, the protective rage, the almost kiss. It was all a lie. A performance. A means to an end. She wasn't a person to him. She was a pawn. The perfect pawn. Her chest ached with a betrayal so deep, so absolute, it eclipsed everything she had suffered before. Silas had rejected her for power. But Damon was trying to buy her with it, using her past as his currency. In the quiet that followed, she backed away from the door, her movements numb and mechanical. She didn't make a sound. She was a ghost again. But this time, something inside her had died. The tiny, hopeful flower that had bloomed in her heart had been ripped out by the roots and crushed into dust. She made it back to her room, the beautiful silk of her gown feeling like a shroud. She looked at her reflection in the dark, silvered glass of the window. She saw a fool. But as the silence roared in her ears, the despair began to harden. It cooled and sharpened into something new, something cold and clear and dangerous. Rage. He wanted a pawn? Fine. He would have one. But this pawn was about to learn a whole new game.
Damon stared out the solar window into the moonless night, the argument with Cale leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated and weary. You do not see the truth, he said, his voice low. I see the reality, Cale shot back, his loyalty warring with his deep-seated fear for their kingdom. I see a council of sharks circling, and you've just thrown a bleeding lamb into the water. She is no lamb, Damon growled, turning from the window, his patience worn thin. He couldn't tell Cale the whole truth, the real truth. He couldn't speak of the mate bond, that mystical, undeniable pull that was both his greatest strength and his most profound weakness. He couldn't explain that when the assassin's blade had grazed her skin, he had felt it in his own soul, a line of fire that had ignited a fury so primal he could have leveled the entire castle. To admit that, even to Cale, would be to admit he was compromised, ruled by something other than logic. So he had fallen back on the language of strategy, the cold calculus of kings. He had framed his choice in a way Cale would understand, as a political maneuver. He had called her a blank slate, an opportunity. The words felt like ash in his mouth, a betrayal of the sacred truth stirring in his heart. But it was necessary. It was the only way to protect them both. My decision is final, Damon said, his tone leaving no room for further debate. Ariel stays. You will treat her not as a liability, but as your future queen. Do you understand me? Kyle looked at him, his scarred face etched with worry, but he finally bowed his head. Yes, my king. After Kale left, Damon remained in the solar, the silence pressing in on him. He felt a sudden, urgent need to see her, to erase the harsh words he'd been forced to speak with a moment of simple, honest connection. He was tired of the lies, tired of the strategy. He wanted to see the fire in her eyes again. He found her by the window in her chambers. She was bathed in moonlight, a vision in sapphire silk, so beautiful it made his chest ache. Ariel, he said softly. She turned to him and his breath caught. Something was different. The fear was gone. The defiance was gone. Her face was a mask of serene, unnerving calm. Her eyes were clear and steady, holding no trace of the storm he knew must be raging inside her. He took a step closer. I'm sorry for what happened in the library. I give you my word. It will not happen again. You are safe here. And then she did something that shocked him to his core. She smiled. It was a small, hesitant thing, but it reached her eyes. It was the first genuine smile he had ever seen from her. I know, she said, her voice soft and even. After today, I understand. Lord Valerius is dangerous. She took a small step towards him, closing some of the distance between them. You were right all along. Her voice trembled just enough to be convincing. I need your protection. Damon's heart swelled. It was working. She was finally beginning to see, to trust him. He had won. Relief washed over him, so potent it almost made him dizzy. He had been so afraid he was losing her, pushing her away with his methods. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. Her skin was soft, cool. I will not let anyone harm you, he promised, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer hide. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes holding his. I believe you, she whispered. It was the most dangerous lie she had ever told. And as he looked into her beautiful, trusting face, Damon, the Alpha King who saw every angle and anticipated every betrayal, saw none of it. He saw only victory. He had no idea that he had just lost the entire war.
Deception became her shield and her sword. Ariel moved through the frozen halls of Frosthold not as a prisoner, but as a spy wearing a queen's silks. Her smile was her sharpest weapon, and her feigned loyalty was her deepest cover. She spent her days in the royal library and Damon's study under the guise of learning the history of the North. In fact, she was mapping the castle, learning the guards' patrol schedules, and listening to the servants' gossip. She was a ghost with a purpose. Her first major breakthrough came a week later. She was organizing Damon's war room, a task she had sweetly volunteered for, when her fingers brushed against a false bottom in an old chest. Her heart skipped. Inside, tucked beneath ancient maps, was a ledger. It detailed illicit trade routes for silver, a metal toxic to werewolves in large quantities, and the transactions were all signed with the unmistakable sigil of Lord Valerius. That night, she waited for Damon in his study, the ledger hidden in the folds of her gown. When he entered, looking weary from a long day of council disputes, she put on her most earnest, worried expression. Damon, she began, her voice a soft, hesitant whisper. I may have found something. I don't know if it's important, but I was tidying your war chest and... She presented the ledger to him. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion. But as he scanned the pages, his confusion melted away, replaced by a slow, dangerous smile. He looked up at her, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated pride. It was the look of a king who had just been handed the perfect weapon to destroy his rival. Ariel, he said, his voice thick with an emotion she now knew was a complete fabrication. You are magnificent. He stepped forward and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. You see? This is why you are meant to be here. Not just as my mate, but as my queen. my partner. She forced herself to lean into his touch, to meet his gaze without flinching. Her insides were a frozen wasteland, but her expression was one of shy, blossoming affection. "I only want to help you," she whispered. It was the truest lie she had ever told. She did want to help him, right into the trap she was setting. Without another word, he closed the distance between them. This time he didn't stop. His lips met hers, and the kiss was everything she had secretly dreaded and desired. It was possessive, passionate, and full of the triumphant fire of a king who believed he had just conquered his last territory. Her heart screamed in protest, but she kissed him back. And she let it happen, because she knew, with a chilling certainty, that this would give him the confidence to make his final, fatal mistake.
The ledger was more than proof, it was a declaration of victory. With it, Damon could not only discredit Valerius, but could also legally seize his lands and titles, shattering the rival faction for good. And Ariel, she had given it to him. She had chosen his side. His heart swelled with a fierce, possessive love that was so powerful it almost frightened him. The mate bond, which had pulsed quietly beneath the surface, now roared to life. He had been right about her. She was his other half, the perfect partner to rule at his side. He would no longer wait. He would no longer play defense. It was time to end this. The next day, he called an emergency session of the Council of Alphas. The chamber was cold and silent, the air thick with hostility. Lord Valerius sat opposite him, his face a mask of smug superiority. The other alphas were tense, their loyalties divided, waiting to see who would emerge the victor. Ariel sat in a chair just below the dais, a silent, beautiful observer. "I have called this session to address the traitor in our midst," Damon began, his voice echoing off the stone walls. He let the ledger fall onto the council table with a heavy thud. "Lord Valerius has been smuggling silver through our lands, a poison to our people, and lining his own pockets in the process." A wave of shocked murmurs swept the room. Valerius, however, did not look surprised. He simply raised an eyebrow. "Bold accusations, Your Majesty. Forged documents are easy to come by." "This is not a debate," Damon growled, his patience gone. "Your lands and titles are forfeit. You will be imprisoned for your treason." But then Valerius smiled. It was a thin, cruel smile that did not reach his eyes. "You cannot imprison me, Your Majesty, because the Council does not recognize the authority of a king who so blatantly flouts our most sacred laws." He stood up, his voice rising, addressing the other alphas. "He brings a rejected, unmarked whore into our sacred halls. He elevates a tainted creature and calls her his intended. He spits on our traditions, on our purity. How can you follow a king who is so clearly weakened by his base desires?" The room erupted. Alphas shouted their support for Valerius, others for Damon. It was chaos. But then, Damon raised his hand, and a wave of pure, potent alpha power silenced the room in an instant. "You are right about one thing, Valerius," Damon said, his voice dangerously calm. "She is more than my intended." He stood up and walked down the steps of the dais, stopping directly in front of Ariel. He went down on one knee before her, a king kneeling before his future. The entire council gasped. "I, Damon Frost, Alpha King of the North," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute power and devotion, "do hereby invoke the right of sovereignty. I will not merely mark her. I will not simply make her my Luna. I will bind her soul to the magic of the throne itself. I will make her my queen, and her word will be law, second only to my own." It was an ancient, powerful magic, not used in 1,000 years. A move so bold, so absolute, that no one had ever thought to see it again. He had just staked his entire kingdom, his very life on her. He looked at her, his golden eyes blazing with love, expecting to see awe, gratitude, maybe even love in return. He did not see the sheer, mind-numbing terror that was screaming behind her eyes. Nor did he see across the room the slow, triumphant smile that spread across Lord Valerius's face. He had just walked directly into the trap.
Panic. It was a cold, slick serpent coiling in her gut. Queen. The word was a death sentence, a magical, unbreakable chain that would bind her to him, to this frozen prison, for eternity. Her plan to escape had just been incinerated. Time was gone. All her clever maneuvering, all her secret plans, they were useless now. Her mind raced. Escape is no longer enough. He is going to bind me to the throne itself. I have to get out. I have to get out now. She felt faint, the edges of her vision blurring. Damon was still kneeling before her, his face alight with a triumphant love that made her want to vomit. The whole room was staring. She felt like an animal in a trap, the steel jaws closing around her leg. That night, a message found her. It was a single folded piece of parchment, left on her pillow by a maid whose eyes refused to meet hers. There was no signature, only a time and a place. The West Gate, midnight. Your freedom awaits. She knew who it was from. Lord Valerius. Her first instinct was to burn it. Valerius was a snake, a monster who had tried to have her killed. He was just as bad as Damon, maybe worse. But what choice did she have? Damon was offering her a gilded cage with a magical lock. Valerius, on the other hand, he was offering her the key. He was offering her the one thing she craved more than anything in the world, a way out. Deep down, she knew the truth. It was a trap. Of course it was a trap. Valerius wouldn't help her out of the goodness of his heart. He wanted to use her, just as Damon had. He would use her as a weapon to destroy the king, and then he would discard her. But what if he didn't? What if this was her one and only chance to be free? The hours leading up to midnight were the longest of her life. She paced her room, her thoughts a tangled, desperate mess. She thought of Damon's kiss, the surprising flicker of something real she had felt. Then she remembered his cold, calculating words from behind the solar door. A blank slate. An opportunity. The memory was like a splash of ice water, hardening her resolve. She was a fool to feel anything for him. He was her captor. Valerius was an enemy, yes, but he was an enemy offering a deal. At 5 minutes to midnight, she made her decision. Dressed in a dark cloak, she slipped through the sleeping castle, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The West Gate was used for servants and supplies, and it was less heavily guarded. As she approached, a figure detached itself from the shadows. It wasn't Valerius. It was one of his guards. "Lady Ariel," the man said with a slight bow. "My lord is a man of his word. He offers you safe passage out of the north and a life of your own choosing. All he asks in return is your testimony before the council. A simple statement that the king took you against your will, that he conspired to use you to seize power." He was asking her to betray Damon. Publicly, irrevocably. To hand Valerius the knife he needed to slit the king's political throat. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "And you'll let me go? Just like that?" "Just like that," the man confirmed, his smile thin and reptilian in the moonlight. "Your rejection becomes your liberation. My lord is waiting to finalize the arrangement." She took a shaky breath. This was it, the point of no return. She was choosing to trust the devil she didn't know over the devil who had kissed her, like she was the center of his universe. "Okay," she whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "I'll meet with him." She was about to trade one cage for another, and in her heart, she knew this night would end in blood. The night air was a blade against her skin. She met the guard by the West Gate, a place shrouded in the deep, inky shadows of the castle wall. Her cloak was a flimsy shield against the biting wind, and her heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs. This was it, the point of no return. The man's smile was a sliver of white in the darkness. "My lord is pleased you've seen reason," he murmured, his voice a low hiss. "He asks only for your public testimony, a simple truth, that the king took you against your will, that he planned to use you." Before he could finish, torches flared to life all around them. They weren't alone. As if summoned from the very stones of the castle, figures emerged from the darkness. But it wasn't a rescue. It wasn't Damon's guards. At the head of the group, his silver hair gleaming like freshly drawn steel in the torchlight, was Lord Valerius. He wasn't there to make a deal. He was there to spring a trap. Ariel's blood turned to ice. She had been so stupid. "What is the meaning of this?" Valerius boomed, his voice a performance of shocked outrage for the gallery of Council Alphas who stood behind him. He pointed an accusing finger at her. "Treason! I find the king's intended consort conspiring with my own guard in the dead of night." The guard who had lured her there immediately dropped to his knees. "My lord, forgive me. She approached me. She offered me gold, a place in her own pack, if I would help her escape. She said she was a spy for Mooncrest all along." The lie was so perfect, so venomous, it stole the air from her lungs. She couldn't speak, couldn't defend herself. Her throat was a knot of pure, cold panic. "Just as I suspected," Valerius declared, his cold eyes sweeping over her with triumphant disgust. He addressed the other alphas. You see the poison he has brought into our home? Her kind cannot be trusted. Rejection is a mark of a flawed character, a stain on the soul. She was born to betray. He was using her past against her, twisting her greatest shame into her greatest crime. In that moment, she finally saw the full, horrifying scope of his plan. He hadn't just wanted to use her to discredit Damon. He wanted to use her to prove his entire traditionalist ideology. And then, to make things worse, a figure appeared at the far end of the courtyard. It was Damon. He stood there, a silhouette against the distant light of the castle, drawn by the commotion. Her eyes locked with his across the space, a desperate, silent plea on her lips. She expected to see fury. She was prepared for the cold rage of a king. But what she saw was so much worse. She saw the raw, splintering shock of a man, of a mate, who had just had his heart ripped out. She saw the profound, personal agony of betrayal. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a mask of ice so cold it chilled her to the bone. The guards seized her arms, their grips like iron. She didn't fight. She couldn't. Because the only thing that mattered was the look in his eyes. She had played her game, and she had lost everything.
The ice started in his veins and spread outwards. He stood in the council chamber, the accusations of Lord Valerius echoing in the vast, cold space. The story was perfect. The treacherous, rejected she-wolf, a spy from her old pack, had tried to bribe a loyal guard to escape and sell Frosthold's secrets. Valerius had, of course, heroically uncovered the plot just in time. It was a masterpiece of lies, built on a single damning kernel of truth. Ariel had been there. She had gone to meet that man. She had chosen to betray him. The memory of her smile, of her soft, whispered words, "I need your protection," was a knife twisting in his gut. It had all been an act. Every touch, every glance, every single moment of budding hope had been a lie. He felt the eyes of every alpha in the chamber on him, waiting. They smelled blood in the water. They saw a king weakened by a woman, a fool who had been played. His wolf snarled, a low, murderous rumble in his chest, demanding he rip Valerius's throat out for the insult, for the deception. But the king knew that was exactly what Valerius wanted. "The evidence is irrefutable," Valerius said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "She has proven herself a traitor to the North, and the old law is absolute in these matters." He paused, letting the words sink in, a hangman tightening a noose. "A consort to the throne who commits treason, especially one who is unmarked and unbonded, must be put to death. It is the only way to cleanse the line, the only way to restore honor to the crown." Death. The word was a physical blow. They were going to kill her. The room was silent, waiting for his response. This was the end game. Valerius had him trapped. If he defended her, he was a king defending a traitor, proving Valerius's point that he was weak and compromised. If he let her die, the thought was a void, a black hole that threatened to swallow him whole. But then, Valerius offered him a way out, a poisoned chalice disguised as a peace treaty. Of course, Valerius said smoothly, stepping forward. There is a way to heal this wound, a way to unite the North and prove your strength once and for all. He smiled, a predator showing its teeth. The council would be willing to overlook this unfortunate incident. We would support your reign without question. All you must do is renounce the traitor, allow the law to take its course, and form a true, honorable alliance. An alliance? Damon's voice was dangerously quiet. My daughter, Lyra, Valerius said, a pure-blooded alpha of the highest lineage. A union between our houses would secure the North for a generation, a true queen. All you have to do, Your Majesty, is let go of your broken toy. The choice was laid bare before the entire world, his kingdom or her life. Logic, duty, 1,000 years of kingship. They all screamed at him to take the deal, to sacrifice the one for the many, to cut out the poison and save the body. He looked at the smug, triumphant face of Lord Valerius. He thought of Ariel, alone in a cell. He thought of her fire, her defiance, her scent that called to his very soul. He thought of her betrayal, and he made his choice. He looked directly at Lord Valerius, and the full, untamed power of the Alpha King finally broke free. A wave of pressure that made the very stones of the castle tremble. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, guttural promise of war. I will not.
The cell was a box of cold stone and colder silence. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a slow, maddening rhythm that marked the passage of her last hours. There was no window, only a sliver of gray light beneath the heavy iron door. It smelled of damp earth and despair. It was the end of the line. She had gambled and lost, and now she was here, waiting to die. She curled into a ball on the thin, straw-covered pallet, a tremor running through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of running, tired of being a pawn in the games of powerful men. Sometime later, hours maybe, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. A key scraped in the lock. The door groaned open, spilling pale torchlight into her tomb. A guard stood there, his face impassive. The council has delivered its judgment, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Ariel didn't move. She just stared at the damp wall, waiting for the final blow. You have been found guilty of treason, the guard continued. The sentence, according to the old law, is death. It will be carried out at sunrise. She closed her eyes. Of course. It was what she expected. A quiet, hollow acceptance settled in her bones. But then, the guard spoke again, and this time, there was a cruel, mocking edge to his voice. Lord Valerius offered the king a deal, a chance to save his crown. All he had to do was let you go, renounce you, marry a pure-blooded alpha, and unite the kingdom. A tiny, bitter part of her waited for the next words, waited to hear that he had taken the deal, that he had cast her aside just as Silas had. It would hurt, but it would be a familiar pain, an expected one. He refused, the guard said with a snort of disbelief. Ariel's eyes snapped open. What? The guard seemed to find it amusing. Can you believe it? He refused. He's chosen to let his kingdom fall into civil war, to defy the entire council, for a rejected little stray he picked up in a gutter. He shook his head, a look of contempt on his face. All that power, and he's going to let it all burn for a possession he refuses to give up. The guard's words were meant to be a report, but to Ariel, they were a final, devastating revelation. It wasn't love. It wasn't devotion. It wasn't a grand, romantic gesture. It was pride. He wasn't saving her. He was refusing to lose. She was a thing he had claimed, a piece on his board, and he would rather shatter the whole world than admit defeat and let another man take what was his. She was nothing more than the hill he had chosen to die on. And in that moment, something inside her finally, truly broke. Her first rejection had damned her. This new claim would be the death of her. Her life, her death. It had all been decided by the whims of alphas. She had no agency, no power, no voice. She was utterly, completely alone. The guard left, plunging her back into darkness. The sound of the key turning in the lock was the sound of her own tomb being sealed. She lay there in the suffocating dark, no fight left in her. She didn't rage. She didn't scream. There was nothing left but a vast, empty silence. And for the first time since she had been cast out all those years ago, a single hot tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. It was a tear for the girl she had been, for the queen she might have become, and for the woman who would die at sunrise, a forgotten casualty in a king's foolish war. In the quiet that followed, despair began to fester. The guard's words replayed in her mind, a cruel looping echo. A possession he refuses to give up. She wasn't a person to him. She wasn't a mate. She was a thing. A treasure he'd found in the mud and would rather smash than let another man claim. The realization hollowed her out, leaving nothing but a cold, aching void. She had been defined by Silas's rejection, and now she would be defined by Damon's pride. Her life was a story written by others, and this was the final tragic chapter. But then something shifted. Beneath the layers of grief and betrayal, a tiny, hard ember of her true self remained, a flicker of the girl who had been trained to rule. The guard's words twisted, their meaning changing, rejected, tainted, stray, possession, the labels they had all tried to stick on her. As the silence roared in her cell, a new thought, sharp and clear as a shard of ice, cut through the fog. They were all wrong. She was not defined by what a weak alpha had cast aside. She was not defined by the laws of a corrupt council, and she would not be defined by the pride of a possessive king. She was Ariel. She was a survivor. Her worth wasn't something they could give or take away. It was forged in the fire of her own resilience. In that moment, a profound, liberating calm settled over her. If she was going to die, she would not die as their pawn. She would die as herself. Her thoughts spun, creating a new reality. As if fate whispered on the wind, she decided she would walk to that execution block with the dignity of the Luna she was born to be. The sound of a key scraping in the lock ripped through the silence. Her heart didn't leap with fear. She felt ready. She pushed herself into a sitting position, her back straight, her chin high. This was it. The executioner had come. But the figure that stepped into the dim light wasn't a hooded stranger with an axe. It was Cale, Damon's scarred, ever-loyal beta. He stood there for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He had never liked her, had always seen her as a liability. She expected him to deliver a final, smug insult. Instead, his voice was rough with an emotion she couldn't place. "He's a fool," Cale said, not looking at her, but at the damp stone wall. Ariel said nothing. "I've known him my whole life," Cale continued, his gaze finally meeting hers. And in his eyes, she saw not contempt, but a grudging, weary respect. "I thought I knew every move he would make. I told him you were a political risk, a weakness. I told him he was being a fool. He took a step closer. I was wrong." Her breath caught. "When he refused the council's deal," Kyle murmured, his voice dropping low, "I didn't see a king making a strategic error. I saw a male choosing his mate over the entire world. I saw the look in his eyes when he spoke your name." Cale's face was grim. "That wasn't pride, my lady. That was desperation. It was the sound of a soul being torn in two." Ariel's carefully constructed calm began to crack. It couldn't be. Could it? "The king has a plan," Cale said, his voice urgent now. "It is insane. It is dangerous. It relies on ancient magic that hasn't been used in centuries, and it will either save you both or get you all killed. He locked his eyes on hers, his next words heavy with the weight of the world. But it will not work unless you trust him. Completely. One last time. He was giving her a choice. After everything, after all the manipulation and control, her fate was once again in her own hands. She could die with dignity, alone. Or she could take one final, terrifying leap of faith on the man who had both caged her and, just maybe, would set her free. Her soul answered before she even thought the words. What do I have to do? The sanctum of law was a place of bone-deep silence and slumbering power. It was the heart of Frosthold, a circular chamber carved from the mountain's core, where the original law stones of the first Alpha King were kept. Damon stood in the center of the room, the air humming with dormant magic. He wasn't preparing for a battle of swords and claws. He was preparing for a battle of will and soul. Valerius wanted to use the old law to kill her. So, Damon would use the oldest law to crown her. His hands moved with steady purpose over a massive stone tablet, its surface covered in the faint, glowing runes of the first tongue. This was the right of sovereignty. A magic so potent, so absolute, it could rewrite reality. It could take a rejected, unmarked she-wolf and elevate her to a status beyond any pureblood. It was a king's ultimate gambit, a power that hadn't been touched in 1,000 years because the price of failure was absolute. Not just death, but the complete annihilation of his line and his magic. He was not afraid. He was terrifyingly focused. All his life, he had ruled with his head, with cold, calculated strategy. But his calculations had failed. His manipulations had driven Ariel away, right into Valerius's trap. Now, for the first time, he would rule with his heart, with the raw, untamed power of the mate bond. It was the only move he had left. The heavy stone door to the sanctum groaned open. Cale entered, his face grim. "She's agreed," Cale said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. Relief, so powerful it almost buckled his knees, washed through Damon. He had been so sure she would refuse, and he wouldn't have blamed her. He had given her every reason to hate him, to distrust him. Her agreement was an act of faith so profound it humbled him. "Is everything prepared?" Damon asked, his voice steady. "The execution platform is ready. The council is assembled. Valerius is practically preening on his high seat, certain of his victory," Cale reported. "He thinks you're going to make a final, foolish plea for her life before he has you arrested for defying the council." "Good," Damon said, a slow, predatory smile touching his lips for the first time in days. "Let him believe he has won. Pride has always been his weakness." He turned from the law stones, his preparations complete. He wore no armor, only the simple black tunic of his house. He carried no sword. His only weapon was the truth of the bond that pulsed between him and Ariel, a bond he was about to reveal to the entire world. "It's time," he said. He walked from the sanctum, leaving the ancient silence behind. He walked through the halls of his ancestors, his every step a silent promise to the woman waiting for him. "I am coming. Trust me." He stepped out into the courtyard, into the cold gray light of dawn. The air was thick with the scent of his enemies, of their hatred and their triumph. He saw the platform. He saw the hooded executioner. He saw Valerius, smug and victorious. And then he saw her, and the world stopped. She walked. Cale led her from the dungeons, not as a prisoner, but as an escort. As they emerged into the courtyard, a low, hostile growl rippled through the assembled crowd of alphas and their packs. They were a sea of snarling, judgmental faces. She saw their contempt. She saw their pity. And for the first time, she felt none of it. Her chin was high. Her back was a rod of steel. She channeled every lesson, every piece of her brutal Luna training. Her steps were measured, graceful, and silent. She was not a condemned traitor being led to the slaughter. She was a sovereign walking to her throne, even if that throne was a block of cold, unforgiving stone. This was her final act, her one true choice, and she would perform it with all the grace and power she possessed. The wind carried his name, and she looked up. He was standing at the foot of the platform, alone and unarmed. He wasn't looking at the council, or at Valerius, or at the executioner. He was looking only at her. The moment their eyes locked, the world fell away. The roaring crowd, the biting wind, the cold dread. It all vanished. There was only him. In his eyes, she didn't see a king or a captor. She saw the raw, desperate soul of the man Cale had spoken of. She saw his fear, his hope, and a love so fierce and absolute it stole the breath from her lungs. In that single, silent glance, he laid his entire soul bare for her to see, and her own soul, scarred and battered as it was, answered, "I trust you." She reached the platform and ascended the steps, her gaze never leaving his. Lord Valerius rose to his feet, a triumphant smirk on his face. "The traitor has been brought forth to face justice," he boomed, his voice full of false piety. "The old law is absolute. Let the spirits of our ancestors bear witness as we cleanse this stain from the north." Ariel walked to the center of the platform and stopped. She did not kneel. She stood tall, facing her accusers. She faced her death. She felt it, etched in fire. The bond pulsed between her and Damon, a silent, screaming promise across the space that separated them. Valerius looked down at her with contempt. "Have you any last words, outcast?" Ariel took a slow, deep breath, and a serene calm washed over her. She looked past Valerius, past the council, her eyes finding Damon's one last time. And then, she smiled. Valerius, enraged by her defiance, turned to the executioner. He raised his hand, the signal for the end. "Let the old laws be honored," he roared.
As the executioner raised his axe, a sliver of polished steel against the gray dawn, time seemed to fracture. Before the blade could fall, Damon moved. He didn't roar. He didn't charge. He simply stepped forward, his presence a wave of absolute power that washed over the courtyard, bringing everything to a dead halt. The executioner froze, his arm trembling in midair. "Enough." Damon's voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like thunder. He walked toward the platform, his golden eyes fixed on Ariel, a silent promise passing between them. He ignored the sputtering rage of Lord Valerius, the confused gasps of the council. His entire world had narrowed to her. "You invoked the old law to condemn her, Valerius," Damon said, his voice ringing with a cold, clear power as he ascended the steps. "A law of blood and fear." He stopped before Ariel, turning to face the stunned crowd. "But you have forgotten the oldest law, the law of will, the law of the soul." Without warning, he strode to the ceremonial law stone that sat at the edge of the platform, a relic of the first kings, meant only for witness. He drew a wicked-looking dagger from his boot. In one clean motion, he sliced his own palm open. Blood, dark and rich with magic, welled up instantly. He walked back to Ariel, his bleeding hand held out. The crowd gasped. This was not part of any ritual they knew. This was something new, something primal. "Her rejection is her liberation," Damon declared, his voice a vow. Her unmarked skin was not a sign of shame. It was a blank slate, waiting for the mark of a king. In that moment, he reached for her. He pressed his bleeding palm against the bare, vulnerable skin of her neck, right over the spot where a bite should have been. And the world exploded.
The moment his hand touched her, it wasn't pain she felt. It was fire. Her world tilted. A white-hot power surged from his palm into her very soul, a torrent of ancient magic that burned away the last vestiges of her old life. It wasn't a mark of possession. It was a coronation of liquid lightning. She cried out, a sound that was half agony and half ecstasy. Her vision blurred, the faces of the crowd dissolving into streaks of color. All she could see was him. All she could feel was him. Her bones remembered him. Her soul answered him. A shockwave of pure, untamed magic erupted from them, a visible wave of golden light that slammed into every wolf in the courtyard. It wasn't an attack. It was a proclamation. It knocked the council alphas back a step, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. On her neck, his blood was sealing into her skin, forming not a scar, but a complex glowing sigil, the royal crest of Frosthold, interwoven with runes of power she had never seen before. The air thickened, crackling with ozone. The bond between them, once a phantom pulse, was now a roaring, tangible thing. It was a bridge of soul and magic, and the entire world could see it. In the stillness that followed, Damon slowly pulled his hand away. He turned to the crowd, to the shell-shocked face of Lord Valerius, and his voice boomed with the power of the mountain itself. "By the oldest law, by the magic of my blood and my will, I claim her," he roared, his hand protectively on her shoulder. "She is not my consort. She is not my Luna." He looked at her, and his eyes were full of a love so fierce it was a weapon. "She is your queen." In the quiet that followed, the only sound was the wind whispering across the stunned courtyard. The mark on her neck tingled, a warm, living thing, a constant reminder of the impossible thing that had just happened. She could feel the power humming in her veins, a new and startling strength. But then, a voice shattered the silence. "Blasphemy!" Lord Valerius shrieked, his face contorted in a mask of furious disbelief. "This is dark magic, a trick. He defies the law, he spits on our ancestors, he cannot simply create a queen." A growl rose in her throat, low and feral. The wolf she had suppressed for so long was now awake, pressing forward, and it demanded to be heard. Before Damon could speak, before anyone could move, Ariel stepped forward. All eyes snapped to her. She looked at Lord Valerius, not with fear or anger, but with the cold, detached pity one might feel for an insect. "You speak of laws," she said, her voice quiet, yet it carried with the same unnatural authority Damon's had. It was the voice of the throne itself. "You built your entire life on the words written on stone, but you forgot that laws are meant to protect the pack, not to cage it." She took another step, descending from the platform to stand on the same ground as him. "You used my past as your weapon. You called me rejected, tainted, astray." She let the words hang in the air. "You were right. I was rejected. And in that rejection, I learned a truth you have never known, Valerius. I learned that a wolf's worth is not measured by the mark on her skin, but by the strength of her will to survive." Without thinking, her body moved on instinct. She raised her hand, and a faint golden light, the same magic that now marked her, flickered around her fingertips. "And by the authority of this throne, which you so rightly fear," she said, her voice dropping to a final, chilling whisper, "I find your character flawed. I find your soul tainted." She met his horrified gaze. "And I find you banished. You will leave the northern lands by sunset and never return. That is the new law." Valerius stared, his mouth agape. He looked to the council for support, but he found none. One by one, starting with the alphas closest to the platform, the wolves of the north dropped to one knee. Not just to their king, but to their new queen. They had not been defeated by force. They had been humbled by a power they could not deny. Damon came to stand beside her. He didn't speak. He simply took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. It wasn't the grasp of a captor. It was the touch of an equal, a partner.
Days later, the quiet of the castle was a balm. The political storm had broken, leaving behind a new, uncertain peace. Valerius was gone, his factions scattered, his power shattered. The council had sworn new oaths, their fear replaced by a grudging, awed respect. The kingdom was his. No, it was theirs. He found Ariel on the high balcony overlooking the realm. the same balcony where she had once faced him with so much hatred. The first rays of dawn were painting the snow-capped peaks in hues of rose and gold. She didn't turn as he approached. "It's so quiet," she said softly. "Peace often is," he replied, coming to stand beside her. They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching the world awaken. Truth be told, he knew this was the moment that mattered more than any council meeting or oath of fealty. This was the true test. "Ariel," he began, his voice rough. He turned to face her. I was wrong. My methods. My lies. I told myself it was to protect you because that was easier than admitting the truth." She finally looked at him, her eyes clear and searching. "What is the truth, Damon?" she asked, her voice gentle. He took a deep breath, laying his soul bare. "The truth is I was a coward. I have ruled for a century, and I have never known fear, until I saw you in that tavern. The moment I saw you, I knew you were my mate. And the thought of losing you, of you rejecting me, it terrified me. So I tried to control it. I tried to cage you, to force a bond that I should have earned. I am sorry." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but it was not a tear of sorrow. She reached up and gently touched the glowing mark on her neck. "You told me my rejection was a political gift," she whispered. "And you were right. It was. It broke me down so completely that I was forced to rebuild myself from nothing. It made me strong enough to survive you." She gave him a small, sad smile. "And strong enough to forgive you." His heart, a thing he'd thought was made of ice and duty, seemed to melt in his chest. He reached out and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away her tear. "So what now, my queen?" he murmured. She leaned into his touch, her eyes turning back to the vast, sprawling lands below them. "What's my first decree?" she mused, a flicker of her old fire returning to her gaze. She looked out towards the distant, hazy line of the neutral territories, the place where she had been so lost. "My first decree," she said, her voice filled with a new and powerful purpose, "is that a wolf's worth will no longer be decided by a mark, or the lack of one. No one is ever to be cast out for another's choice. Rejection will no longer be a sentence of shame." As the sun crested the mountains, bathing them in golden light, Damon took her hand. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He simply held on, a king beside his queen, a male beside his mate, ready to face the dawn of their new world together.